Welcome to the Empathy Stories channel, where every story takes you on an emotional journey that touches the heart. Today, we share a tale of unexpected kindness, of a lost little girl and a man who, despite his struggles, finds within himself the strength to help. Join us as we explore the power of compassion and how sometimes the simplest acts of care can change lives forever. There are days when the weight of the world settles quietly on your shoulders, and no one notices. You walk among the crowds, a face in the sea of thousands, yet you're invisible. That's how Jack lived, day after day, unnoticed, unmourned, fading into the backdrop of a city that never paused. The world was too busy to care about a man like him. Jack used to matter. There was a time when he had a purpose, a role that defined him. He was a man full of ambition, chasing dreams and living with a sense of pride. Once, he had been successful in his career, respected by colleagues, loved by friends. He had lived in a neat, tidy apartment in Brooklyn, a far cry from the crumbling bench he now occupied in Central Park. But that was before everything fell apart, before life became a long string of disappointments and decisions that led him to this place. The contrast between his past and present felt as stark as the city skyline against the ever-changing sky. It was a bitterly cold morning in November when Jack sat there, hunched over in his worn-out coat, a thin layer of snow dusting his shoulders. The city was alive as usual, cars honking, people rushing about, their faces set in the familiar lines of city-dwelling indifference. The hum of the metropolis never ceased. There was no space for someone like Jack, who had fallen through the cracks of the system. His coat was too thin for the winter winds that cut through the park. His shoes, patched together with bits of fabric, barely kept the cold at bay. As he watched the world from his solitary corner of the park, Jack couldn't help but remember how different things used to be. He had once lived in a small house with his wife, Kate, in the suburbs of New York. They had big dreams, plans for the future. Kate had always been the heart of their home, and they were happy. It was in that house, in the warmth of their love, that Jack had felt truly alive. But life had a way of stealing joy when you least expected it. Kate passed away after a long battle with illness, leaving Jack to navigate a world without her by his side. It was the first crack in his foundation. He tried to move on, to continue with his life. But the world had already shifted beneath his feet. Slowly, his career crumbled. What had once been a bright future now seemed like an endless string of setbacks and failures. The city felt colder without Kate, and the pain of her loss followed him like a shadow, clinging to him as he walked the streets. It was around that time that Jack lost his job, an office position he'd held for years. They told him they were downsizing, but Jack knew it was just another polite way of saying they didn't need him anymore. He was expendable, and the hardest pill to swallow? His friends, those he once considered close, slowly drifted away, their lives moving forward while it seemed to have come to a standstill. He moved from one temporary job to another, each one more soul-crushing than the last. But nothing ever felt quite right. The apartment he once called home was sold, the funds used up, and Jack was left without anything to hold on to except his memories. Now, sitting on that park bench, Jack had long stopped trying to fight the tide of his life. The dreams he once had faded into nothingness. The people who walked by him didn't even look his way. He was part of the background, just another nameless face in the crowd. Sometimes he wondered if he'd ever truly been seen. He didn't expect people to stop and talk to him. But there was a time when a simple hello or a warm glance would have made all the difference. But now, the world had its sights set on other things, other people. The park, a place he had once visited with Kate, now felt like an alien landscape. He sat there day after day, his mind drifting back to the past, to the life he'd once known. There were moments when he could almost hear her laughter, feel her presence beside him. But those moments were fleeting, and soon enough, the reality of his situation would crash back down around him. He wasn't even sure why he still came to the park. Maybe it was because, in this vast, sprawling city, it was the only place where he felt even the smallest sense of connection, like he wasn't completely invisible. Jack didn't have much in the way of material possessions, but he held on to a few keepsakes things that had been his anchor. There was a worn-out leather wallet that used to belong to his father, a little trinket from his trip to London years ago, and a faded photograph of him and Kate, taken on their last vacation together. The picture was framed and sat on the edge of the bench next to him, weathered by time, just like everything else in his life. But even these small things couldn't hide the sense of emptiness Jack felt. He had grown accustomed to the loneliness that came with his life. But every now and then, it would hit him like a wave, a crushing reminder that the life he had once known had slipped through his fingers. As he sat there, hands stuffed into his coat pockets, Jack tried not to let the cold get to him. He thought of the past, of the joy and laughter, of the love he had shared with Kate. It felt like a lifetime ago, but those memories were still alive in his heart, a flicker of warmth amidst the chilling winds of the present. But as the day wore on and the hustle and bustle of the city continued, Jack began to wonder, was he truly invisible? Or was he simply unwilling to be seen? It was just another ordinary morning, or so Jack thought, as he sat on his usual bench, watching the ebb and flow of the city around him. The park, nestled in the heart of New York City, was busy with the usual hustle, joggers rushing past, tourists snapping photos of the towering skyscrapers, and workers sneaking in a moment of quiet before they headed off to their offices. The world was always in motion, and Jack was just a shadow in the corner, blending into the scenery. But then, amidst the chaos of the city, something caught his eye, a small figure, barely noticeable among the adults hurrying along the park path, appeared like a flicker of light in the distance. At first, Jack thought it was just another child playing, but as she drew nearer, he saw her more clearly. It was a young girl, no more than 5 years old. Her clothes were far too thin for the chill in the air, and her small face was streaked with tears. She clutched a teddy bear tightly against her chest, its fur matted and worn. The little girl walked aimlessly, her eyes darting around the park as though searching for something or someone. She looked lost, and the panic in her eyes was unmistakable. Jack's heart ached as he watched her, the instinct to help stirring something deep inside him. He hadn't felt that feeling in years, this desire to make a difference, to offer some kindness in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. Jack stood up slowly, his legs stiff from sitting too long on the bench, and walked toward her. He didn't know what he would say or how he would help, but something in the girl's eyes pulled him in. As he got closer, he saw that she was trembling, her small body shaking not just from the cold but from fear. "Are you lost, little one?" Jack's voice was soft, not wanting to startle her. The girl looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. Her face was pale, her cheeks streaked with tears, and her bottom lip quivered. She was so small and fragile. And in that moment, Jack couldn't help but feel protective. "I can't find my mommy," she whimpered, her voice barely a whisper. Jack's heart sank as he saw the fear in her eyes. He crouched down to her level, his knees creaking with the effort, and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry," he said softly, trying to reassure her. "I'll help you find her. You're not alone." The girl's eyes searched his face for any sign of truth in his words, and when she found none, she began to sob softly. Her little hands clutched the teddy bear even tighter, as though it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Jack could feel the weight of her fear pressing in on him, and for the first time in years, he felt a surge of purpose. He wasn't just Jack the invisible man sitting on the park bench anymore. In this moment, he was Jack the protector, the one who could help. He didn't know what had happened to the girl or how she ended up here alone, but that didn't matter. He was going to make sure she was safe. "Let's walk together," he said gently, offering her his hand. "We'll find your mom." "Okay." The girl hesitated for a moment, glancing at his outstretched hand. But then, as if sensing his kindness, she took it. Her small fingers closed around his, and a sense of calm seemed to wash over her. Jack could feel the trust building between them, fragile but real. He smiled reassuringly, and together, they began to walk slowly through the park. As they moved along, Jack tried to keep her mind off the fear that was still gripping her heart. He pointed to the fountain in the distance and told her a silly story about a family of ducks that once lived there. To his surprise, She giggled softly, the sound of balm to both their souls. Jack smiled, realizing how much he had missed the innocence and lightness of a child's laughter. It reminded him of simpler days, of times before his life had spiraled out of control. For a brief moment, Jack felt a flicker of hope. Hope that he could be more than the invisible man lost in the city. He could be something for someone else, someone who needed him. And in that fleeting moment, he remembered a time when he had been someone's world. The little girl looked up at Jack, her wide, tear-filled eyes searching his face for reassurance. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jack could see the fear written clearly in her expression, the kind of raw, vulnerable fear that only a child could feel when they were truly alone in the world. Her small hands, gripping the worn-out teddy bear, trembled ever so slightly. "I can't find my mommy," she whispered, her voice quivering. The words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. He crouched down to her level, trying his best to seem non-threatening, even though the tremor in his own hands betrayed the nervousness he felt. He had spent so many years isolated, disconnected from others, that the mere act of talking to a child felt strange. But in that moment, there was no hesitation. Something deep inside him stirred. This girl needed help, and Jack knew he couldn't walk away. "Don't worry," he said softly, offering her a reassuring smile. "We'll find her. You're not alone." Jack took a deep breath, forcing himself to steady his nerves. The girl nodded, her face still clouded with fear, but with a flicker of hope starting to replace the panic. She gripped the teddy bear tighter, and Jack gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Together, they began walking through the park, Jack leading the way, and the little girl following closely behind him. As they moved through the park's winding paths, Jack tried to distract her from her fear, speaking softly as he pointed out the little details around them. "There's a fountain just up ahead," Jack said. "It's one of my favorite places in the park. You know, a family of ducks used to live there. They had baby ducks that would swim around and make funny little quacking sounds. It was always so noisy, but it was kind of nice." The little girl looked up at him with curious eyes, and Jack could see a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She spoke, her voice a bit steadier now. "I like ducks," she said, "and my teddy bear's name is Mr. Fluff. He likes ducks too." Jack smiled at the simple, innocent pleasure she found in talking about her teddy bear. It reminded him of his own childhood, of simpler times when the world felt less complicated and people, even strangers, looked out for one another. He couldn't help but think of his own children, grown now and far away. The emptiness of his life, the years of loneliness, came rushing back. But as he listened to the girl, there was something about her innocence, her ability to find joy in the small things, that filled him with warmth. For a brief moment, Jack allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, life hadn't completely forgotten about him. Maybe there was still room for kindness and connection, even for someone like him. As they walked, the little girl started to talk more freely, telling Jack about her favorite things, her love for chocolate cake, how she couldn't wait for her birthday, and how much she missed her mommy. Jack listened, nodding, offering quiet words of encouragement when she mentioned her birthday wish. But the ache in his heart deepened with each passing second. She was so young, and yet here she was, wandering alone, her mother nowhere to be found. By the time they reached the far end of the park, Jack felt a growing sense of urgency. He needed to find her mother. The girl's quiet sobs had become more frequent, her anxiety creeping back as the minutes passed. Jack's chest tightened with the weight of his own memories. Memories of a time when life had felt safer, when love and family had been constants. He longed to return to that place of security, but it seemed so far away now. The world had become a place of shadows, and he, like so many others, had fallen into them. But not today. Today, he would make sure this little girl wasn't forgotten. Today, he would do everything in his power to make sure she found her mother. With a deep breath, Jack scanned the park for anyone who might know the girl's mother. The sound of children playing in the distance, the murmur of people talking, and the rustling of leaves in the breeze filled the air. Time was slipping away, But Jack wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not when someone, even a stranger, needed him. "Let's keep looking," he said, giving the girl's small hand a gentle squeeze. "We'll find her. I promise." As Jack walked the little girl to the park entrance, the sound of her voice as she spoke of her mother, her excitement about reuniting, filled the air between them. It wasn't the noise of the bustling city, or the constant hum of life going on around them. It was the sound of something real, something that had been long lost in Jack's own world. Hope. For Jack, that afternoon had awakened something deep inside him, something that had been buried for years. As he parted ways with the girl, seeing her run toward her mother, Jack stood there, watching her disappear into the embrace of a world he thought he had lost. It wasn't just the girl who had been found that day. It was Jack, too. He realized that, despite the years of solitude and hardship, he was still capable of care, still capable of seeing someone else's pain and doing something about it. Jack had learned that even in the deepest darkness, kindness could light the way. His own life had become a series of cold, solitary days. But in that moment with the girl, he saw a path forward, one that was filled with purpose. Even if it was just for a little while longer, he understood now that no one was ever truly invisible if they were willing to reach out. That small act of kindness, the simple decision to help, had revived a part of him he thought was long gone. In the end, Jack learned that his worth wasn't in his past or in the mistakes he'd made, but in his capacity to care and be there for others when it mattered most. For the little girl, it was a different kind of lesson, one that was full of trust and gratitude. In her young eyes, Jack had been a stranger, a man whose face was weathered and whose hands were rough. Yet, without hesitation, she had trusted him to guide her, to help her find the safety and love she was searching for. The girl learned that the world wasn't entirely a frightening place, that even in the midst of her fear, there were people willing to offer their kindness and care. Jack had shown her that even when you're lost, you're not always alone. Sometimes, the right person comes into your life when you need them most, and it's okay to trust them. For her mother, the lesson was one of gratitude, of the joy that came with finding what was lost, the relief of seeing her daughter safe in her arms. After what must have been a terrifying time, was overwhelming. But more than that, it reminded her of how precious life was, how every moment counted, and how easy it was to take for granted the people who loved you. She learned to never forget to cherish the ones she held dear, to never overlook the simple moments that truly made life beautiful. The city, with all its noise and rush, continued on around them, but for Jack, the lesson was clear. Every person had value. Every small act of kindness rippled out into the world in ways he could never fully understand. And even though his past may have been filled with regrets, his present could still be full of meaning. It wasn't about erasing the pain of the past, but learning to live in a way that gave value to the future, one kind gesture at a time. As for the girl, she would likely grow up never fully understanding the depth of what Jack had done for her that day. But the memory of the man who helped her when she was scared and alone would live on inside her. It was a moment that would shape her future, even if she didn't know it yet. For her, Jack would forever be a symbol of the kindness that can appear when you least expect it, and the reminder that the world still holds good people, even in the darkest corners. And so, they both walked away from that moment, forever changed. Jack had found the heart to care again. The girl had found her mother, and the city around them kept on moving. But somewhere, deep within, the lessons of the day were etched into their souls. Lessons that would last far beyond that fleeting afternoon in the park. The true beauty of the story wasn't in the resolution of the lost child, but in the quiet revelation that even the most overlooked and forgotten can find redemption, love, and purpose through a simple act of kindness. Jack had rediscovered what it meant to be human again, and that was the greatest lesson of all. Thank you for joining us here at Empathy Stories. We hope this story of Jack and the lost girl has touched your heart and reminded you of the beauty in offering kindness to those in need. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We appreciate your support. and we look forward to bringing you more heartwarming stories. Until next time, stay kind, stay compassionate,